Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. I am very excited for today's video. I'm going to be kicking off an eyeshadow panning project that I think I'm just going to do until the end of the year, so just for 3 months. I will probably call this Pan Those Eyeshadows because I'm going to be panning those eyeshadows, but it's not going to be like the Pan Those Eyeshadows that was created by Alexandra Sorensen. Is that how you say her last name? She's no longer creating YouTube videos, but I did pan those eyeshadows for quite a number of years. The project is still alive and well on YouTube, so I definitely recommend checking out that project if you haven't heard of it. Just search the hashtag pan those eyeshadows, and there are so many creators that do this project, and it's so fun to watch. But I have hit pan on 12 eyeshadows in my palette collection this year. By the way, it is midday, so the sun is coming through, and there's not a whole heck of a lot I can do about the lighting, so if it's like so bright, I'm sorry. But I haven't really been focused on actually panning eyeshadow throughout my collection the last year or so. I did a pan that palette last year, and I'm currently working on the Rowan 75 Degrees quad in my Rolling Project 10 pan, and I actually just said I'm bringing back pan that palette with the Jackie palette. But panning eyeshadow used to definitely be a much heavier focus for me. Over the last several years, I've definitely enjoyed kind of branching out, trying indie palettes, and just making palettes more of like a center theme in my channel. So rather than trying to pan eyeshadow, I have been doing No Pan Left Behind, and I have really enjoyed that project just to kind of help me gain a better understanding of each of the palettes throughout my collection. However, it is still really fun to hit pan on eyeshadow, and as I was sitting down to film one of my palette week videos, which was all of the palettes I've used this year, there are some palettes throughout my collection. Can you tell my squirrel brain, my ADHD is just everywhere? I was just distracted by the things behind me. Anyway, where was I? I miss panning eyeshadows. Oh, as I was filming that video, I noticed that there are several palettes throughout my collection that I feel like I'm pretty close to hitting a pan on, and I would love to try and hit 12 more pans before the end of the year, which I know means I would have to hit pan on 4 eyeshadows a month. Can we do it? Maybe. So I have some palettes here. I haven't even counted how many, and a couple shades throughout these palettes that I'm going to try and hit pan on. So if you're interested in which eyeshadows I am focused on the rest of the year to hit a pan on, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project panning content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. Okay, I'm gonna title this section of today's video the Danessa Myricks section. I have the Lightwork 3, 4, and 5 here that I would like to hit a pan in each of these, at least one pan in each of these palettes. So in Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 3, I already have a pan on the shade Polaris, and I did accidentally gouge my nail into Aurora, so this isn't like an actual pan. But what I've noticed with these palettes from Danessa Myricks is the pans are quite shallow, and it's really not that difficult to hit a pan. So I would love to see one more pan in this palette, as this is my oldest Danessa Myricks palette, and I just really enjoy reaching for this one. I think Strawberry Moon would be a really easy shade to focus on as like an inner corner highlight, especially to pair with purple looks. We know I love blues, so it would also be fun to try and reach for Martian, and that's a really beautiful shifty shade. Also, the shade Solarian would be a really fun kind of warm gold to pink peachy sort of shifty shade. I don't know which one specifically, but I would like to hit at least one more pan in the Lightwork Volume 3, which I think I will. By the way, I think I will update this series every month until the finale at the end of the year. All right, Lightwork Volume 4 from Danessa Myricks, I actually also have a pan in, and I have a pan in the shade Divinity. I don't know that you'll be able to see the pan because of the sun, but again, just the pans in this palette are so shallow. I would really love to hit one more pan before the end of the year. I would love to hit a pan in Trance, just because I love to reach for this shade on Vikings game day, so that could be a really fun one to try and focus on. Or the shade Angels would be a really beautiful kind of silver lid topper shade that I could focus on. I honestly don't care which shade it is, but I would like to have another pan in this palette before the end of the year. All right, and then finally we have Lightwork Volume 5. I'm not gonna try and hit a pan on Volume 6, which just released, but if it happens, it happens. But here we have Lightwork Volume 5, which is the only palette aside from 6, which I just purchased, that doesn't have, the only Danessa Myricks palette that does not have a pan. So would love to hit a pan on this. I think if I wanted to go the easy route, Resilient, this really beautiful kind of baby blue would be a fun inner corner highlight. Same with Protected, that could be a fun purple inner corner highlight. But it would also be fun to hit a pan in like the shade Brave. I think might be kind of easy just because it's more of like a textured shade that I feel like is one of those that like you wouldn't even like purposely hit a pan, but because you're like pressing in, you might hit a pan. And it is a really beautiful kind of silver blue sort of shade, which is a shade that I absolutely love. So again, with this one, I don't really care which pan I hit, I just want to hit a pan. And then kind of speaking of those more like putty textured eyeshadow shades, I would love to hit one more pan in the shade why is my brain not working? In the Ensley Rain Flower Moon eyeshadow palette. I do already have 2 pans in this palette. I have a pan on the shade Persephone as well as Dahlia, and I really think with just a couple of uses I could hit a pan on the shade Sprout, just because all of those shades are those like more textured kind of like ColourPop Super Shock shadow type of shades that just because you're already pressing into the shadow, like pan just comes. But I think this is such a beautiful palette, and honestly, if I were to hit a pan on any of these shades, I would be a happy camper. Same with any of my other Ensley Rain's palettes. Like I would love to hit a couple more Ensley Rain eyeshadow pans before the end of the year, but that is the palette that I feel like I'm closest to hitting a pan on. Then I have my Urban Decay Stone Vibes eyeshadow palette, and this one, again, these are kind of like a weird putty, not a weird, but like a putty texture, so I feel like pan should come quickly. I feel like I'm so close on Meditate, but the pan, like where it's like wearing away is so close to the edge that I honestly am like, I don't know. And then I love to reach into Tiger's Eye. I think this is such a beautiful like golden champagne shimmery shade, but I don't necessarily know, I don't know how shallow or deep the pans are. I feel like I should hit a pan on Tiger's Eye like relatively soon, but who knows? Now that I'm looking, I'm like, is that a fleck or is that a pan? Looks like a fleck. Okay, hopefully we have a pan in either Tiger's Eye or Meditate or both before the end of the year. Next up, I have my Dose of Colors Friendcation palette, and this is one of the older palettes in my collection. This shade Cracked and Broke, and aside from that, I have no pans in this palette, but I'm so close, what feels like so close on this shade. This shade, I have a really good dip going, but it's like one of those dips where like it feels like the dip is like dipping underneath something that goes over top, so like the shadow's gonna fall in and maybe I'm not even close. Do you get what I'm saying? I don't know if I get what I'm saying. But I also feel like I could hit a pan on this like champagne colored shade too pretty easily. Honestly, if I could hit pan on a number of shades, like multiple in this palette, that would feel like an accomplishment. At least one, like at least one. I have an Oden's Eye palette, the Trick or Treat palette. I feel like I should be pretty close to a pan on the shade Witch's Brew, which is this really fun, warm, metallic green. It is such a fun shade, one of my favorite greens in my entire collection, and a shade that I am honestly so excited to continue to reach for. So pan is coming in this one. This is one that I use my finger to apply, and it again is kind of like that putty like texture, and I have such a deep dip going in the shape of a finger. I feel like I'm so close to pan on this one. So this one I'm also aiming to hit a pan on. Then I have the Glaminatrix Sugar and Spice eyeshadow palette, and I again don't know how deep these pans go or how shallow they are, but I feel like I could easily hit a pan on the shade Basil. It is this really beautiful ethereal blue, kind of like a blue brown, but more light and ethereal and just fairy-like than like a deep blue brown. I think it is such a beautiful shade. I love to pair this with like a cool toned neutral matte shadow. I think is such a stunning look, and so I would love to have a pan on this before the end of the year. And honestly, I don't know how deep the pans are, so I don't know if like, I think I'm really close, but maybe the pans are actually really deep, so I'm not that close. We'll find out. My final focus palette is the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde, which is such an old palette in my collection and has admittedly been a favorite for many years, but I feel like I've done that thing with this palette where I feel like I can't use it unless it's a special occasion, because I've just like thought of this palette as such a special palette just because it's called Mercury Retrograde. Like I just hold this in such a special place in my mind simply for the name and because I do love Huda Beauty. But I do have one pan currently in this palette. It is in the shade Momentum. Now historically, Huda shades are, at least in the larger palettes, in the Obsessions palettes, I feel like it's relatively easy to hit a pan, but the matte shadows specifically in the midi palettes, I've been told are definitely more difficult to hit a pan on. And honestly, it took me quite a while even to hit a pan on the shade Momentum, which is really just like a lid setting shade. I do feel like I'm somewhat close to hitting a pan on the shade Nebula up here, which would be really exciting. Or I would love to focus on Supernova, which is this really beautiful mid-toned warm pink, or even Gold Glitch is such a beautiful shade. Regardless, this is such an old palette in my collection that I have not loved enough, especially for how highly I speak of this palette. So I would love to see this palette get a little bit more love, a little bit more use, and have at least one additional pan before the end of the year. So that is going to be the goal. And then after that, I know this video was very short and sweet, but those are the palettes that I want to focus on. Hopefully get some pans going. Fingers crossed, have 12 more pans that I can hit before the end of the year, so we can hit 24 eyeshadow pans in 2024. I would love to know if you're currently panning any eyeshadows, or what the most recent eyeshadow shade is that you had a pan on. What palette did it come from? Let a girl know in the comments below. Other than that, thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting me and my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.